Okay. Um, yeah, it should be light now or whatever. I'm just gonna go and
Who remembers the early 2020s trend of creepy gaming anti-piracy screens? I'm sure basically everyone, right? But there are endless hours of compilation videos on these, usually related to Mario, Sonic, or Nintendo games, but people have made them for just about every video game out there. It sort of popped up during the analog horror craze, and sort of capitalized on the same kind of horror. It all started with this pretty innocuous Mario Party DS one, which by today's standards of these things is quite tame, but was the first of many fan-made anti-piracy screens. Today, we obviously know these are all fake, but back then I think they at least started out as somewhat realistic, if a little creepy, and then completely devolved into hilarious, borderline satirical creepypastas with hyper-realistic blood and Mario like hanging from the ceiling with his guts out as Nintendo says they're gonna come to your house and kill your whole family if you don't turn your game console off. But believe it or not, this trend actually started from real anti-piracy and copy protection measures put into games by developers. A lot of the time, they're pretty funny and incredibly creative solutions rather than anything creepy, although you could definitely make the case that some of them are kind of eerie, so that's what we're going to be covering today. None of the fan-made stuff, but rather the real anti-piracy measures and screens in video games. Tip of the iceberg.
probably not.
GTA 4 Drunk Camera. This is probably the most infamous and well-known real anti-piracy measure. Warning though, this footage can give you a headache just by looking at it. It's basically what it sounds like. It's one of the many anti-crack protections this game has. The game runs a DRM, or Digital Rights Management System, for CDs/DVDs known as SecuROM. which gained
And
prominence in the 2000s as a method of detecting unauthorized copying, also known as the pirating of video games.
Why am
One
I using
such
that
game to
as
have
well?
this
I don't
copy
know. I have
protection system in place was the PC version of Grand Theft Auto 4, and if the game detected something was off, you're met with this permanent drunk camera, which is extremely disorienting, essentially mimicking the effect of when Nico is drunk in the game, but it even plays during cutscenes. All the vehicles you enter also permanently accelerate and have limited HP, meaning they blow up in one hit. I gotta admit, this is a pretty funny troll by Rockstar, but I can't help but think someone is crazy enough to have tried to beat the game with these settings still on. You'll come to find out throughout this list, that practice isn't all too uncommon. Alright, we gotta move on and get this off my screen. It's actually giving me a headache now. Serious Sam 3 Scorpion. This
NHL playoffs are on. Follow with Tony
Is it
Bet.
over yet?
Tony Bet, we're here to play.
Come on,
Over
maybe.
75% of ingredients will be from nature or recycled materials by 2030.
Hello everybody, today we're going to be breaking down the rest of the unfiction historical horror nightmare, the Monument Mythos. Now I've already made one video about the series, but if you
I
have
haven't
a version
finished
of her with the teddy bear at the Rockefeller Plaza, both of them wound up in the same location, if in different timelines, and then switched. One of those versions of Virginia, supposedly the one we've been following the entire time, came out in the 2003 bending event whenever the Washington Monument bent over and the lightning strike happened, and then the other one died at the age of 59 in 1980. That whole thing I mentioned when I was finishing up the opening analysis, where I said it doesn't make sense that one died in 1980 and the other was alive for an event in 2003. Well, this is how that makes sense. Now, there's still questions about her son Everett and how he can skip one timeline and not the other, and questions about Maya, but I'll talk more about those in the theory side. The last thing I want to mention, the things that I realized on a second watch through, is whoever Lev is, he's credited in the credits as being the voice actor of both James Dean and John D. Rockefeller. Fantastic voice actor. I could never tell they were the same person. Both parts were played so well. Lev may do other parts, come to think of it, but those two roles specifically, excellent job. If you're watching this, Lev, hats off to you. But on that note, I'm going to jump over here, and we are finally going to begin to break down the timeline of the Monument Mythos. So, first of all, I've got to say, Purple Monster, not the biggest fan. I mean, it's okay. It's probably going to warm up on me. I think I'm more of a Pink Monster girl. Still like the fruit punch that Kayla put me on, whatever that stuff's called. Between pink and purple, I like that one the most. The original Monster probably still my favorite, but pink over purple, but I would still go for it. So, also, do you all like this? This took an unreasonably long amount of time to do, but it's all color-coded and everything, and I just thought it looked neat. So this is a timeline of everything that happened in the series. I'm not going to try to make it both timelines, the Deanverse and the Nixon verse yet, because I don't want to hate myself that much. But this is every event that can be given a specific time within the series, within the relevant timeline. Like, if we want to get technical, they mentioned Giza glass had been found for thousands of years, but this is just like relevant stuff that happened with the story. So to tell you about the color codings, green is stuff that we know for a fact is today. Like in the story, they say on this day, in this year, this event happened. Like, no question about it, that's what green is. Blue is stuff that I did like a little bit of math or reasoning to figure out, but it's not far-fetched at all. Like, for example, I said Virginia was born in 1921. That's because it says she was 59 when she died in 1980. So it stands to reason she was born in 1921. The orange ones are ones that are just too big to put in like the small amount of whiteboard space that I have. So I just like, it's like an asterisk and then it's explained through here. This is like that zoomed up or whatever. And then the one red one is one that I'm so unsure about that even looking at it right now, I think it's probably wrong, but I'll explain that when we get to it. I also want to say that in the description of the video is going to be a version pretty similar to this that was expertly mapped out. A Discord user by the name of Lucid, who's been active in the Monument Mythos community a lot longer than I have, was kind enough to put together their entire telling of all this, along with like a paragraph description for each one. So if you look at this and you can't really tell what it says, or you think it's confusing, go to the Google Doc that I linked by Lucid in the description. They did a fantastic job, and I'm sure you'll find it somewhere in there. There are a few discrepancies between our two charts. Just looking at them, I think there were 3 different times that we disagreed on a date or whatever, but I did this by myself, and Lucid did it as being a member of the community with likely input from the rest of the community. So if there's a discrepancy between the two of us, just assume that Lucid is right, because like the amount of caffeine that put this together in the past 2 days should be illegal. So without further ado, let's explain the timeline so far of the Monument Mythos. In 1840, the first photograph of the special tree was taken, and then in 1848, the DC monument around that special tree was beginning to be built. In 1858, 10 years later, Thomas Crawford was commissioned to build the Freedom Fowler, and then between April 5th and April 29th of that same year, the events of Nina's Diary took place, or in other words, the Freedom Fowler grabbing her, running up the mountain, everything on the boat, and all of that. Shortly after that, in the United States, between 1861 and 1865, the Civil War took place. The reason that's relevant is it's the first time that we have a record of people being fed to these monument creatures. On from that, in 1880, Petrie finds the Giza glass in Egypt, which was the start of a series of unfortunate events. And then in 1888, the DC monument, which was beginning to be built over here, is finished. In 1889, the interview was conducted with the designer of the Statue of Liberty, and then 2 years after that is when Petrie's lot finally makes its way to England. At this point, the DC monument was finished, so in 1910, the DC monument begins to take in visitors. We see that from the brochure. And then in 1918, Germany attacks the United States and Europe with crowns. Now, I don't know for a fact this was 1918 itself. The wording Rockefeller uses is by 1918 Germany had done it, but because we don't have any other year, and because Rockefeller said it was too close to the end of his presidency for him to do anything, I'm going to say it was like 1917, 1918. It doesn't matter that much, but it's pretty close. Speaking of Rockefeller, his presidency had to take place from 1909 to 1917. The reason for that being, he mentions that he served 2 terms, and he is also mentioned as 1918 being right at the end of his terms, and the only elections that could have filled that entire gap was if he won the 1908 election and was president from 09 to 17. Now, obviously, if his terms were split up, then it would be different, but that would be really lame for a timeline, so I'm just going to say it was those years. And then shortly after that, in 1921, Virginia is born. And then in 1934, the Rockefeller tree tragedy takes place, which according to the theory I mentioned earlier, is the first time, at least in this story, that the timeline swap occurred. That would also mean that Virginia was 13 years old at the time of the tragedy. Only 3 years later, Rockefeller writes of the tree tragedy, as well as the Rockefeller Revelation, and then on May 23rd of 1937, he goes into his bunker and is subsequently killed by the Avogadro. In 1939, Virginia leaves the orphanage that she was in. The reason that I guesstimate that is because she said that she was 18 whenever she left. And you get the math of the day, figure out she was born in 1921, she'd be 18 in 1939. Now, here's the fishy one, and the one that, looking at it now, I'm probably wrong about, but I'm going to leave for aesthetic reasons. So, whenever she goes to the tree, she asks the tree to send her home, and the tree says come back in 3 years. However, that section of the video loops 3 times in a row. So a lot of people have taken that to mean that she went in 1939 whenever she left the orphanage. Tree said come back in 3 years, came back in 42. Tree said 3 years, came back in 45. Tree said 3 years, came back in 1948. Now, the reason that I put it here originally is 1942, as whenever she goes to the DC monument and then falls through the floor and switches back to her correct body, the reason I had that is because, what, I'm totally blanking, I've spoken too much. Oh, because I thought her perception of time was just messed up, and the looping part was just to show like 3 years, 3 loops. But as you'll see if you read Google Doc, and what I kind of agree with now, is that she came on 3 separate occasions, and every time it kept telling her to come back later. So the time that she actually would have went is 1948. And that makes a lot more sense for things like Leonard to find her and fall in love with her, and for them to be pregnant with Everett and all of that. So while I think that happened in 1948, and that's going to matter for reasons of children, we're going to talk about in a little bit whenever I get into the theory side. I'm also going to leave it here as 1942 because it could also be 1942, one of those 2 years. Anyway, after that, in 1945, a special tree was cut down. Now, we have no idea what this means. However, Leonard, and I believe it was Starry Spinks, mentions that he couldn't cut down a tree in the old days, not until 1945. We have no idea what that entails or what happened, but we just know that in 45, a tree was cut down. Also, and I just thought of this while talking about it, if my whole theory about trees being reality anchors is true, cutting down a reality anchor is probably a really bad thing to do. Just a thought. In 1949, the Statue of Liberty went through its renovations, and that's when they started feeding people to it on the reg. Also after that, in 1954, is whenever the immigrants were specifically fed to it, or even more specifically, the interview took place with the immigrant on Ellis Island where she described the smell of people being let in at night. So, at least from 49 to 54, a lot of people were being fed to beasts. Furthermore, on that note, Maze was founded in 1960 by the 2 Robs, who I have written down somewhere. They don't matter yet in the story, but they probably will in the future. And then a year after that, in July of 1961, Nathaniel Arnoldson was born. So in this little stretch of time, we go from the tree being cut down, a bunch of people being fed to Lady Liberty, and then Maze is founded the year before Nathaniel Arnoldson is born. 7 years after that, in 1968, James Dean wins the presidency. And then in 1969, a whole lot happens, so we're going to step over here. So beginning, obviously, James Dean has his inaugural address. He wins the 68 election. He's inaugurated in 69. On April 20th of 69, he has his 90-day silent address that I mentioned everyone loved because I thought his face was so cute. On May the 13th is when the siren hijack took place. Now, if you look at this, he gave his 90-day address, not long in office at all, and then what, I'm not taking in 31 days into account, but what is that, 23 days? No way off in saying that. I mean, yeah, 23 days later, the siren hijacking takes place. That's a pretty quick turnaround. 9 days after that, the Department of Technology is set up as a response to this. 5 days after that, surgeries begin. And then, what? Again, I'm just saying all months are 30 in my head. 9 days after that, androids start getting used to do the surgeries. I have no idea if they're bad or not. I'm going to assume they are because Dean did it. And then, right at a month later, deafness is cured across the nation. That's like a lot to happen in your first 3 months of presidency unless you want it to happen. Again, only Dean Slander in this house. And then, we're not given a date for it within the year, but we know that in 1969, the Giza Guardian was supposedly shut down. Again, I feel like Dean did that as a PR move, but as sightings said, it was still going on. So Dean continues all this propaganda in 1969. So then in 1970, Mays invents the first at-home computer and personal recording video camera. Only 2 years after that, the Washington Standard operation is leaked, as well as a TFMD protocol set up. What that means is in the same year that the DC monument and the entire thing where it shows people going into the tower and then being dropped, the thing that eventually happened to Virginia, the same year that comes out is the same year that Deanie Boy and all the others established TFMD protocols and said we need to do something about humanity and other monsters we don't like. And also, to look at another one of these scales for a second, from 1960 to 1971 is when the, again, I believe 13 maize plants were built across the United States. And again, I'm pretty sure all of them were built on top of either special tree sites or some sort of esoteric teleportation stuff. And then all the way from here, starting in 1910 to 1971, is when the 20 Washington absentees go missing. What's interesting, looking about it on this graph like this, they all go missing, for one, right before it comes out what they're doing with them and the documents come out, but it also ends the same year that maize quits expanding. I don't know if the two are related or in any way, but it's just interesting. So for 61 years of time, 20 people go missing at the DC monument. And then moving on, and a lot happened right here, that's why it's so jumbled. On December 27th of 1976, the Delaware Double special aired, where it showed that George Washington was frozen in the Delaware River. And then just after that, on January 6th of 1977, so right around a week later, is whenever the Capitol riot took place, where they shot down the Freedom Fowler. And also in 1977 is when the New Delaware Journal made the video about the Capitol riot and the Freedom Fowler being moved to the Grand Canyon. But it's also whenever Howard Melrose leaked the video about what Freedom was doing in the Grand Canyon and subsequently got exiled to Egypt for it. Now this raises a few questions. If in 1977 Howard released the tape that shows Maya Arnoldson getting killed, then how was she able to make videos with her brother after the year 2000 when the movie Maker was made? And we'll get to all of that BS in just a moment. Also, the Dean presidency